My name is Elizabeth Benn. I served in the Army from 1977 to 2008 and earned the rank of Sergeant Major. The title of my book is The Battles of Bazooka Beth. It's a humorous account of 3 decades of military service. The year was 1977. I was a 17-year-old high school senior. The war in Vietnam had ended just 2 years earlier. The Civil Rights Act was barely 13 years old. The second wave feminist movement was struggling along. Microwaves and cell phones were years off. My father was a journalist, one who believed in the principles of the job, and he was very outspoken. Mind you, this is in the 60s and 70s. So because of this, he changed jobs a lot and our family moved around a lot. But we always seemed to end up in towns along the Mississippi River, although it was in 3 different states. The river, growing up, it seemed to be my anchor. In those days, an awful lot of teenagers ran away from home and also dropped out of high school. I had thought about doing that from time to time, but I had no idea what I would do. Then I started noticing the military recruiting ads on TV all the time. I talked to my guidance counselor at school. He told me that girls had to be high school diploma graduates to enlist. Men could be dropouts, but girls could not. My best friend in high school, her father was an officer in the Air Force and he had retired. He encouraged me to go ROTC. Go to college, become an officer, be the one in charge, he would tell me. But no, the thought of more school was not at all enticing. I had decided I would enlist in the Army. It was just a matter of timing. I started jogging. I finished all my credits by the end of first semester so I could graduate early. Then the school told me, you can't get your diploma until the rest of the class graduates. So I had to wait till the end of the school year. But I was also underage, and I wondered, would my parents sign for me, or would I have to wait until almost the end of the year before I'd be able to enlist? Months later, I found out they were happy, if not eager, to sign me over to the Army. I was working as a waitress. The term server wasn't used back then. 95 cents an hour plus tips. 2 Army recruiters stopped in one afternoon for coffee. They showed me the pay scale. It would be like running away from home, except I'd have a roof over my head, food, and good pay. I also found out that I'd get 30 days of leave a year, so I could come home, well, if I wanted to. And then I learned that I could contribute $100 a month toward a college education, a fund that the Army would match double the amount. And so I thought, gosh, I could go to college. Well, someday, if I thought I wanted to go to school. Maybe I'd just enlist and I'd get out and then I'd go to school. On May 3rd of that year, I enlisted, hoping to enter the carpentry field. I had found out that job was available in the Army. I was really excited. As a kid, I worked alongside my grandfather. He was one of those farmers who could fix or build just about anything. And in high school, I had taken shop class where we built a scaled down section of a house. So I figured, sure, we'll go in the Army, we'll be a carpenter. And then I was told that field wasn't open to girls. I ended up choosing personnel management because it wasn't a clerk typist or a nurse. They seemed to be pretty much the only things that were offered to girls at the time. It also offered the longest wait before I had to ship for basic training. It was May, I could wait until January. I'd have all summer to do what I wanted. I'd be home for the holidays. Couldn't get much better. So on January 12th, 1978, I flew to Des Moines, where I spent the next few days processing in to the Army, lots of paperwork. At the airport in Des Moines, I hailed a cab and showed the driver my voucher that had been given to me by my recruiter. So he knew that I was enlisting, and he thought it was really cool that I was volunteering. The draft had only ended 5 years earlier. Rather than being drafted, he enlisted in the Army, and then he was sent to Germany. He turned the meter off, and we drove around the city, and he told me stories about his time in Germany. And I thought, Germany, wow. I hadn't thought about that. In my haste to leave home, I really hadn't much given any thought as to where. So a few days later, we all flew to Fort McClellan, Alabama, and after being there a few weeks, I realized I had never lived away from the Mississippi River. I came to long for the hills rolling into the river, the barges passing in the night, the trains going by, and I had the thought, could I be homesick? Certainly not. I'd been so anxious to get away. How could I be homesick? Although I did try in my 14th summer, I've never been a cigarette smoker. During basic, when we were out doing road marches and things like that, whenever the platoon took a break, a smoke break, the drill sergeant would assign some tedious task to all of us who didn't smoke. Usually it was picking up the trash or something annoying like that. A few of the girls took up smoking just to avoid doing whatever the tedious task was. I happen to remember the little green Bible that we were given back in Des Moines, pocket-sized. Next day, no, drill sergeant, I need this time to read my Bible. That didn't go over well, but he had to allow it. I became quite familiar with the Bible in the coming weeks. Mind you, I was raised in a strict home, and our family was very active in church. It wasn't totally for show. It was a good source for me at those times, and everything that I would come to learn about warfare and humanity in the coming weeks during basic training. I knew that I would have the opportunity to improve my shooting skills, but I had no idea about the nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare that went on. I was familiar with the bombs being dropped in Japan to end World War II. Growing up in the 60s, we had routine nuclear attack drills. No stranger to things like that, but when I heard about the other things, poisoning a water supply, intentionally infecting people with a disease, I was horrified. And it just didn't make sense to me, and it stuck with me for a long time, and things that I would read in the Bible helped smooth that over. The drill sergeant didn't like me. One day I got called into the senior drill sergeant's office. I couldn't imagine what I had done that would call the attention of that rank, that person, the senior drill sergeant. So I go into the office, and I was told that I wasn't a team player. I asked how. The senior drill didn't know for sure, but it had been in my drill sergeant's daily reports. She thought I might explain to her. I honestly didn't know, so the drill sergeant was brought in. It turns out that I slept in 15 minutes later than the other girls, and that it was causing a morale problem. I asked, was I late for formation? Were my uniforms not squared away? My bunk, my area? What was not being done that needed to be done? Nothing. Well, what is the problem? It seemed that the other girls thought the need to put on makeup in the morning. So they got up earlier, and I slept in, and that apparently was causing a problem. I suggested 15 more minutes of beauty sleep might avoid the need for makeup. I got additional duties in the morning and had to get up earlier than everyone else. I did end up going to Germany 3 times, in fact, and a whole lot of other really awesome places. Personnel management turned out to be not such a bad field. There were a lot of interesting things, helping people solve problems and navigate the ropes to climb up the ladder, and helping solve problems, chart a career path and everything. It was rewarding. We had a lot of good experiences, and maybe a few mild moments of retaliation. I was stationed at Fort Ord, California, a large infantry division. There were several of us women in the same office who a certain Casanova type in one of the units thought he could woo several of us at the same time in the same office. Apparently, when we had met him at the Enlisted People's Club, he didn't notice that the office numbers we gave him were sequential. So he came up for promotion. Back in those days, everything was processed by the use of IBM punch cards. We had stacks of hundreds of stacks of 100 cards. We had to match them up with rosters of people who had lost their promotion eligibility since the punch cards were printed. And it was fairly easy. We went by social security number, so it was fairly easy to find the cards that needed to be pulled. But also, if you happened to wanted to get a little bit of vengeance on someone, it was a good way to get back at someone. That particular person, we never knew for sure if the system erred and didn't print his card, or maybe it just fell out of the stack and we didn't know how, 4 months in a row. Eventually we found the problem and fixed it, and he got his back pay as we knew he would. Double standards for women started being not as obvious. Things were opening up, more fields opening up to women and everything. But I remained in personnel for quite a while after that. One thing that always got me was reading in all the regulations or seeing on the orders of the high-ranking people this address, 200 Stovall Street, Alexandria, Virginia. It was the headquarters for everything personnel in the Army. And it was always some mysterious big place near DC that was 200 Stovall Street, Alexandria, Virginia. After my first 4 years on active duty, I re-enlisted for another 3. I decided there wasn't much to go back to the Midwest, to go back home for. I wasn't ready for college. I didn't know what I would do for a job. So that re-enlistment took me from the mountains of from the coast of California to the mountains of Maryland, about 90 miles outside of DC. I was guaranteed at least 12 months at that duty station, and probably the whole 3 years, the recruiter told me. 15 months later, I found myself back in Germany. After that tour, I decided to go home, back to, at the time it was Iowa. Thought I'd try going back to school and see where it led. I wasn't quite ready. I knew I didn't want to totally leave the Army, so I re-enlisted to go in the reserves. And several years after being in the reserves, I re-enlisted again for an engineer unit, where I was finally able to go to the carpentry masonry course that the Army teaches. So after 14 years from being told that I could not do it, I was finally able to do it. That course taught by the reserves was several months of weekends plus 2 weeks in the summer at Camp Grayling, Michigan. It's in the northern part of the state. There's a big, beautiful lake on the post. Oftentimes, a group of us would go down to the lake at night, down to the beach, and we'd go for a swim, talk stories, drink beer. One morning, of course, there were only 3 women in the class and 40-some men. So one morning, the 3 of us women overslept. All the men were in one barracks, and the women doing all the schools on the post at that time were in another building by themselves. So we wake up to the sound of the men running in formation for PT that morning past our barracks. We hop out of bed. We'd already changed into our PT clothing the night before. We ran out the back door right as the class was rounding the corner to come up behind the buildings, and we hid between the cars, thought we could duck in, join them on the run for the last mile or so back to the start point. Needless to say, it didn't work. 3 girls was just too obvious, and the instructor laughed as he dished out the mandatory remedial PT, and it made for good laughs later that night down at the beach, drinking more beer. With that engineer unit, I was deployed to the Balkans in the mid-90s in support of the operations going on in Bosnia and Croatia. It was 1996. Clinton had just been reelected. Among his campaign promises were to bring all the troops home in time for Christmas. The part that was omitted was that the mission was not ending and more troops would be sent to replace the ones being brought home. I had 3 weeks' notice, and I had 3 children in school. The youngest had just started kindergarten. Most of the girls on that tour were kept in Germany or Hungary. I split my time pretty much between the 2 locations with short jaunts into Bosnia and Croatia. We were aligned with the Corps of Engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers, and we were doing primarily road and bridge inspections and overseeing rebuilding of things, we were a headquarters element, overseeing the units that were doing the actual work. With the unit, we had a lot of the men were certified professional architects, certified professional engineers and things. They were outstanding people, and it was a pleasure to work with them. So at the end of the tour, we're back in Germany. The 2-star general that was overall in charge of all of us was doing the standard award and recognition ceremony. I was called up, award pinned on me, and mind you, this is a 2-star general. He says to me in front of everyone in the room, which was quite a large crowd, you know, my father was a master sergeant, the rank that I was at the time, but he didn't look anything like you. I smiled for the cameras, shook hands, and took my seat. I'll never forget seeing the Sava River, which separates Bosnia and Croatia. It was eerily still and quiet. There were no barges, no boats, no fishermen, nothing on the river, which was totally unlike the Mississippi, where I'd spent most of my childhood somewhere along the Mississippi River. And to me, it was just so unusual. I couldn't comprehend that a river would be so quiet. The area hadn't been cleared of mines. There were dogs walking in known minefields. There were chickens plucking away in the backyards of the rivers that face the houses that face the homes. And it was all taped off with like police tape with the mine marker signs attached to it. And it was just like nothing you can imagine. But there were 3 boys, probably 10 or 12 years old, playing in the river and swimming, quite foolishly brave. And to show their appreciation for our presence, they mooned us as we passed by. So I was back at home in Wisconsin. The reserve unit was clearing out some excess items. The supply sergeant had more of certain items on the books. He had more on hand than he had on the books, one of which was an M72 light anti-tank weapon, a law which is also referred to as a bazooka. He said, "I've got more than these than I'm accountable for. Maybe your kids want to play with it." Sure, why not? It went home with me. It had been stripped of everything that made it functional. It was only used for training, just mostly to get the feel of it and used to having to carry it around and such. We tried to shoot potatoes and tomatoes and tennis balls out of it. You couldn't make it shoot anything. So it was harmless, but whenever the kids had friends over, everybody wanted to see the bazooka. Let's play cops and robbers with the bazooka. And a nickname was formed, one that I've not been able to shake to this day. I worked a civilian job, plus going to school, often full-time, and doing as much as I could in the reserves. I took any extra duty I could get, partly because I needed the money, but also everything extra that I did increased my chances for promotion. And I was determined to get everything that I could out of the Army. And so after one transfer to one unit with a promotion, during the in-processing, the battalion commander, we had an interview, they call it, but mostly welcome to the unit and try to get to know one another a little bit. And he commented that I didn't look old enough to hold the rank that I held, and that some of the old men in the unit might wonder how I really got promoted, and maybe I should just keep a low profile. I asked if those other men in the unit had gone to college and been deployed and things like that. Well, no, of course they hadn't, but you know, they've been in the unit a long time and they're good people, and they're gonna be jealous because, you know, you're new and you're younger than them, and you know, there's always that lingering thing of how did that woman really get promoted? So he tells me to keep a low profile, and I asked him, is that in the job description? No, of course it wasn't. But we got beyond that. Time went on, life was good, certainly not easy, but good enough. After the associate degree, I decided I'd go for a bachelor's. One enlistment turned into another, and even though I had never intended to stay, the thought of the retirement, especially for a woman, it was just, I gotta have it. I'm this close, I'm getting that retirement. Then 9/11 came along, changing the country and everyone's lives forever. I was offered to return to DC, return to active duty and go to DC as an Inspector General. That was in June of 2002. I was happy to accept the job, and then when I got my orders to go back to active duty in this position, I look at them, and what does it say where I'll be assigned? 200 Stovall Street, Alexandria, Virginia. Finally, after 20-some years, I was gonna go to this place, the big, mysterious 200 Stovall Street. So while I was there, there was one of the IGs in Iraq, that's short for Inspector General. One of the IGs in Iraq got into some trouble, and he was being sent back to the States and mandatorily retired. My counterpart at the Pentagon was to go to Iraq for 6 months to take his place, figuring it would take that long to find a permanent replacement for him. So somehow I got selected to take his place at the Pentagon for that 6-month period. And I was thrilled, I was blown away. Don't know how it happened, but by that point in time, so many things had changed. Nobody referred to me as a girl. I enrolled in graduate school, and then when I took the job at the Pentagon, and I was the first woman to hold that position. And I think to this day, I'm not sure that any woman has held it since. It's one of those things that historically has been a man's job as the IG at the Pentagon level. So it was my first staff meeting in the Pentagon. As all the men come into the room, I realized that the lowest ranking person is a colonel. Most of them are 1- and 2-star generals. My boss was a 3-star general, and I happened to be both the only enlisted person and the only female at that particular staff meeting. And so I also noticed that all the men are really tall. I'm not a very tall person. So I tried to sit up taller in my chair so I would look bigger at the table. And I'm involved with the discussions and everything, and I'm thinking in the back of my head, wow, this is really big, you know, this little girl from the Midwest, you know, and like here I am, and I'm doing these big things and thinking this is big, really big. Tried to sit up even taller in my chair, and then I noticed my feet didn't reach the floor, and a little chuckle slipped out. All eyes turned to me. I tried to pass it off as a cough. But in trying to make myself appear bigger, my feet were dangling, and it was funny. And I had to eventually tell them what was so funny. And then I thought, gosh, so much for being so big. So that's my story in a nutshell, of course. There were happy days and sad days, good times and bad times. I served my country well, and in return, I got an interesting and rewarding life, and of course, a solid retirement. The girl who didn't want to finish high school became a woman with a master's degree, and all the individual enlistments added up to a marvelous 31-year career. And most of all, I got a really cool nickname out of it. It was a pleasure to share my story with you, and I thank you for taking the time to listen.